This year's Eid was celebrated further reminds us that we are living in unusual times occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, thus bringing out the need to strengthen our resolve, to change our behavior, and get attuned to new ways of life, because what we used to know as normal has been permanently changed. The Presidential Task Force observed activities nationwide, and reports received were mixed. We, however, remain committed to the pursuit of strategies that would promote our well-being and channel resources towards efforts that would guarantee we overcome this pandemic while limiting its negative effects on our individual and collective survival. Today, the 27th May 2020, is also Children's Day worldwide, and this brings to mind the need to build a legacy that will guarantee a safe and secured future for our children. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the nation was faced with the challenge of out-of-school children, estimating about 12 million. This has now been compounded by the compelling need for closure of schools as part of the measures to limit the spread of the virus. The Presidential Task Force has been deliberating on this situation and wish to inform Nigerians that the Federal Ministry of Education will roll out measures to be put in place for safe reopening of our schools. The Honorable Minister of Education State will be elaborating on the subject this afternoon going forward. He will also clarify the purported announcement of resumption date, which went viral last week. The Presidential Task Force wishes to use the occasion of this celebration to congratulate our children and assure them, their parents, and all stakeholders alike that all hands are on deck to reopen the schools at a safe time. We therefore use this medium to urge states, local governments, proprietors, and other stakeholders to begin to take steps that will facilitate an early and safe reopening. The subject of research has been central to the mandate, thinking, and planning of the Presidential Task Force. Studies have shown that countries in Africa are so far experiencing a low rate of transmission, fewer severe cases, and fewer deaths than that predicted in previous estimates. A recent publication by the World Health Organization on risk modeling for 47 countries in Africa region predicts 82,000 to 190,000 deaths during the first year of the pandemic. However, African countries need to take measures to respond to this worst-case situation, while also ensuring continuation of existing services would certainly stretch our already burdened health systems. Countries in the region need to progressively increase their capacity to detect cases, not just to know the extent of the outbreak, but also to identify and initiate care for people most at risk. They also need to expand capacity to mitigate the implications of widespread community transmission of COVID-19. Above all, more research to determine the underlying factors for the current trend in the pandemic in Africa is needed. In addition to pursuing the line of thought, the occurrences in Kano and some other cities have given us cause to launch our research initiatives using existing structures and systems in a manner that will build a legacy and also prepare Nigeria for any future pandemic. The Presidential Task Force is happy to note that the Central Bank of Nigeria has indicated a willingness to support research efforts. This is therefore a call on all our researchers and scientists to take up the challenge. As a measure of the importance attached to research and development of local capacity for finding a cure for COVID-19, the Federal Ministry of Health held a virtual meeting with a number of researchers and scientists with claims to cure of COVID-19. And out of the numerous claimants, 3 were found to deserve further investigation and have been forwarded to the relevant authorities for appropriate review. Similarly, efforts are being made by the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology to subject a good number of locally manufactured COVID-19 equipment to verification and subsequent certification. In our briefing of Thursday, 21st May 2020, the Presidential Task Force categorically advised Nigerians against self-medication in treating COVID-19. Particularly, the use of hydroxychloroquine was discouraged because it had not been certified for use in treating COVID-19. We have read in the media about the side effects of the use of this drug from COVID-19 patients that survived, as well as those who took it outside clinical supervision. The World Health Organization has temporarily suspended all clinical trials of hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. This advice was informed by a study which identified that the use of the hydroxychloroquine, either alone or with other drugs, has been responsible for a high number of deaths. This precautionary measure by the World Health Organization underscores the importance of not only seeking expert medical advice, but also ensuring that all claims to treatment by scientists and researchers, whether conventional or traditional, should be subjected to scientific certification protocols by NAFDAC and other relevant institutions so as to guarantee the efficacy of the discovery. In some of our previous briefings, the Presidential Task Force hinted about the strengthening of community engagement in the control of COVID-19. I am pleased to inform you that a protocol has been developed and it gives community members greater involvement and ownership in identifying and supporting the case management process. The details will be unfolded in the coming days. As we progress into the closing days of the extension of the eased lockdown phase 1, I wish to assure all Nigerians that the Muhammad Buhari administration feels the economic pains they are passing through, and it is for this reason that beyond the number of stimulus packages, especially for citizens that rely on daily subsistence, the gradual reopening up of the economy is also a strategy in preparing for a post-COVID-19 economy. To achieve this objective, the Presidential Task Force has continued to brief the National Economic Council and the Nigerian Governors Forum. It has also collaborated with the Economic Sustainability Committee, the Economic Impact Committee, and the Committee on Free Movement of Agricultural and Allied Produce. The Presidential Task Force also continues to interact with the private sector, religious and traditional rulers in pursuit of a robust national response. I will now have the privilege to call on the Honorable Minister of State for Health, the DG, Nigerian Center for Disease Control, and the National Coordinator to update you on the state of affairs. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, the Chairman of the Presidential Task Force, my colleagues in the team, media representatives here present, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I shall begin this briefing by congratulating our Muslim brothers and sisters for a successful Salah celebration. And in that regard, I would like to say that may God accept our supplications. And particularly at this point in time, that God will heal our land and grant us peace. I thought I would hear amen. Thank you very much. I note with gladness the substantial adherence to the advisories we gave even during the celebration in most states. The increasing awareness of the disease, and especially the adoption of preventive measures such as the use of face masks in public places during the celebration. We shall continue to engage our traditional and religious leaders to mobilize support for community mobilization and sensitization. Permit me to equally rejoice and celebrate children of the world, and particularly the Nigerian children, as they mark Children's Day. In spite of the low-key celebration, it does not diminish the importance of children in our world. We will continue to focus on child rights and the survival of the child. Happy Children's Day. As you all know, our response strategy is based on trace, test, isolate, and treat. Today, I shall focus on our isolation and treatment strategies. As of this morning, we have recorded a total of 8,344 confirmed cases in 34 states and FCT, out of which 2,385 have been successfully treated and discharged. Unfortunately, we have recorded 249 deaths. While most of those who died had associated comorbidities, we find that 3 out of 4 of those who have been discharged were without comorbidities. This is consistent with the fact that risks are higher for those with other illnesses, such as hypertension, diabetes, and other chronic non-communicable diseases. There is a general reduction in mortality trend and continuous improvement in recoveries, as shown in discharges compared to the increase in the number of confirmed cases. Though not surprising, we are concerned about the increasing number of confirmed cases. This is because very high cases could seriously exceed the capacity of our health system to cope. Routine cases may also suffer as a result. Therefore, non-pharmaceutical preventive approach is still our best strategy. At present, we have a total of 112 treatment and isolation centers in all the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, with 5,324 beds. While only 5 states, including the Federal Capital Territory, have at least 300 beds as prescribed for isolation and treatment, 21 states have less than 100 bed spaces. As the number of cases increase, there is an urgent need to expand our treatment centers across the country. I therefore call on the state governors and philanthropists to take active and deliberate steps to scale up the number of beds for isolation and treatment of confirmed cases in their states. As we prepare to move into the next phase of the response, including the easing of the lockdown, we have conducted a high-level technical session on strategic output of mid-action review and identified priority activities for the next phase of the response. In addition, we have commenced development of sector-specific advisories on reopening. Training of health workers on case management is ongoing in more states. There are global efforts to find cure for the disease, and Nigeria is part of that effort. We have received a few proposals for local remedies for the disease, and these have been forwarded to relevant agencies for evaluation. For a preparation to be approved for use in Nigeria, it must be subjected to safety, toxicological, and efficacy tests, as well as clinical trials. Last week, I led the Federal Ministry of Health team to a virtual meeting with traditional, complementary, and alternative medicine practitioners to discuss and explore opportunities for local solutions to the COVID-19 pandemic. The meeting provided an opportunity for the practitioners to understand the procedures for validating medicines for use in the country. We are also able to find common grounds for collaboration. Government will support every genuine effort aimed at finding a local solution to the pandemic. Maybe just for clarity or sharing more with you about what transpired, last Thursday, we had 19 traditional and herbal practitioners in attendance. But 5 of them were physically present at the conference center where we had the engagement, and others were online. Of course, in attendance were the heads of the various relevant agencies. And by this, I mean NAFDAC, and NIMA, that's Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. We also had NIPRID, that's National Institute of Pharmaceutical Research and Development. We also had in attendance the president of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. We had in attendance academics like Professor Olujoba from Obafemi University, a man that had worked for so many years on plants, medicinal plants. We also had Professor MacDonald from the University of Benin Teaching Hospital, who has also done a lot of work, a lot of research work in medicinal plants. We had the chairman of an ethics committee, and we had other stakeholders that were present. And what we did was to ask each of those present, that is, the traditional medical practitioners, to name their product and tell us at what stage is it, whether it's been listed with NAFDAC, because that's the first step, where NAFDAC will have to determine the fitness for human consumption. I repeat, fitness, not efficacy, and not clinical trial. So, knowing those that have registered with NAFDAC and those who have not, and of course what the remedy claims to do, whether it has to do with remission of symptoms or the shortening of the period of hospitalization, or whether it is to achieve cure. And then we ask each of them to state the challenges. At the end of the interaction, what came out essentially was that, one, practitioners still have issues regarding the process or procedure for getting listed with NAFDAC. Two, the issue of protection of intellectual property rights. Every one of them was scared at how are they sure that somebody will not go behind to patent their own intellectual property. So they needed to be assured that that will not happen and there will be an agreement to be signed on to. Three is the issue of funding, because every of these processes will require some measure of funding. The other issue they came up with is request to have traditional medicine wards, so to speak, to exist side by side with orthodox medical wards, which is not really strange. It's happening in Ghana, it's happening in some other countries, China and so on. That was also a request. And of course, requests regarding fast-tracking some of these processes. And lastly, how do they get patients who will volunteer? Because when you have a new remedy, whether drug or whatever, you will need volunteers. You cannot just grab people and start administering drugs or remedies on them without they themselves, volunteering on their own. And of course, they sign what you may call medical legal papers. So, these are the challenges that we observed as put across to us And we're taking this further. What we agreed to do is, in as much as possible, see how we can fast-track the process without undercutting anything. See how funding can be made available, particularly through the PTF. And I understand that there is an agency that is willing and ready to support one way or the other. But we will do our own internal assessment so that 3 or 4 that we can push further, we would like to do that so that it can move faster on this matter. While we are anxious to find a cure for the disease, that is COVID-19, the federal government will not compromise the health of any Nigerian. We are not prepared to do trial and error with the health of our people. Whatever is approved for use in Nigeria must meet the required standard as determined by the relevant agencies. Let me at this point again advise us against crowding, as this increases the risk of disease transmission. There are global efforts to find a cure for COVID-19. Until a cure or a vaccine is found, prevention still remains the best approach to containing this virus. I thank you for listening.
Presidential Task Force, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen of the press. Let me start by wishing every child out there a happy Children's Day. Leaving home this morning, my children challenged me that they'll be watching us this afternoon very attentively, so I have to be at my best. They asked me what I wish for, and I said I wished I was a child again and I didn't have to be at the presidential press briefing every afternoon. But having said that, it's obviously a privilege to be here, and this is kind of the example that we want our children to live up to. We tell them every day that they are the future of our country, but we also know that they are going through very difficult times. We had a very animated discussion in the PTF meeting yesterday, and I'm sure the Honorable Minister of State for Education will brief the country in detail on how passionately we're thinking about all of them and what the next steps will be. But rest assured that everybody in the country, everybody in this task force is really thinking about the impact of this pandemic on the children, their future. As we try and solve the short-term challenges, we also have to think about the long-term challenges. And it's definitely not an easy period for any of them. Even those that are privileged to have some sort of access to education during this period, many of them are still at home and learning how to cope with the sometimes isolating environment of staying at home every day. We all have to find methods, and this is one area where nobody can say he knows the right way or the wrong way or the best way. But what I've found is, as much as possible, to use this as a teaching moment for them in terms of science, in terms of the work that we do, to be open and transparent about the challenges that we face, both in terms of teaching, health, and obviously the most difficult of all of them, being a good parent. So really wish all the children out there happy Children's Day, and rest assured that we're working very hard to ensure your future as well as ensure the health of our country. Having said that, the other thing I'd like to speak a little bit about today is some emerging new studies. Like I've said severally, we are really learning in real time about this outbreak. So every time we stand up here and speak, we have to speak with humility, knowing that something we said a few weeks ago might change as new science evolved. When we started this, not everybody was wearing a mask. But as the evidence around the benefit of wearing a mask comes together, then we make a decision and we act on that collectively. And really, this is unique in the history of infectious diseases, that you have an outbreak that's really being learnt on and new knowledge is being applied in real time. So the most important bit of new knowledge is around the test that we use. So we use a test called real-time PCR, polymerase chain reactions, to detect the virus. Now, what this test actually does is detect fragments of this virus. Now, what has emerged over the last few days is detection of fragments of this virus over time doesn't in itself mean that there's an active virus over time. So studies have now shown, using this PCR test, in addition to something we call viral culture day to day, that the longest viability period of the virus is about 10 days. So this virus, even though we can still find it on PCR after 10 days, 20 days, and you can see in some of the cases here, some of the celebrated cases we spoke about and engaged our minds, because we couldn't discharge those patients at that time because we did not know how long the virus remained viable for. But now with this new finding, we know that the virus is viable for around 10 days max. So we're now relooking at our practice, both in terms of discharge criteria and even who to keep in hospital and who can stay at home and for how long. So right now, the entire case management team, which includes colleagues at the Federal Ministry of Health, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, and a few clinicians, are reviewing our case management guidelines, following new guidelines that have already been released by the World Health Organization based on these new findings, to redefine our approach around admission, both in terms of who is admitted and duration of admission and when to discharge. So we're going to release these new guidelines as soon as we achieve consensus on some of these major issues, and then continue to learn. If we're able to do this successfully, it will have big implications on the duration of time people spend in hospitals and when they can be discharged. That will enable us bring in people more frequently. It will ease up some of the bed space and help us in some of the more practical challenges we have day to day. So that's just an example I wanted to leave with you today on how in real time new science is emerging. We're translating this into new guidance and using those new guidance in real time to change our response. Thank you very much.
Honorable members of the PTF, ladies and gentlemen of the press, good evening. I hope you've had a good cell break despite the challenging times we're in. Today I intend to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the different arms of government as it relates to the COVID response. This is partly because we get a lot of questions from members of the public regarding specific issues and clarifications. So although this list is not an exhaustive one, I hope it will provide some of the information that the general public need to know. So in terms of the government agencies, obviously we have federal and state structures. Under the federal structure, we have the Federal Ministry of Health. What is the role of the Federal Ministry of Health when it comes to the COVID response? Well, first of all, they are primarily responsible for policy formulation as far as the health sector is concerned. They are responsible for providing psychosocial support, and also through the Ministry of Labor, ensuring health workers are provided with allowances, life insurances, tax rebate, etc. The Federal Ministry of Health is also responsible for strengthening and improving patient and health care through supporting state government health structures to ensure all COVID-19 patients are treated. And then finally, they are responsible for the certification of medical products. So anything you take in terms of food or drugs, working through NAFDAC is responsible for coordinating this. So that's the Federal Ministry of Health. What about NCDC? NCDC primarily are responsible for the public health response. So here we are talking about provision of guidelines. For instance, we have guidelines on patient care. We have guidelines on case management. We have guidelines on burial of persons who have died from COVID infection. NCDC is also leading the effort in designing and implementing national testing strategies to scale up testing in Nigeria. They also coordinate a network of molecular laboratories for COVID-19 diagnosis across the country. But note, I said they coordinate. They do not own most of these laboratories, and neither are they responsible for the testing that occurs in most of these labs. NCDC support states in sample collection through capacity building at the state level. They also provide training to the states in terms of sample collection and testing. Finally, NCDC conducts risk communication training for community healthcare workers, as well as related public health communications and awareness campaigns. So that's the NCDC. What about the Federal Ministry of Information? The ministry disseminates information to sensitize Nigerians on the fight against COVID, as well as transparently communicate federal government activities on the emergency response. Foreign Affairs. The Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs is responsible for mostly consular services, and they also take the lead when it comes to the evacuation of Nigerians wishing to return home as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ministry of Aviation gives access and movement rights, including essential air travel, particularly as it relates to health issues, and also helps us with approvals when it comes to the delivery of commodities by air. The Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development coordinates all humanitarian activities, and they also work with state government structures on the distribution of COVID-19 palliatives. Finally, at the federal level, we have the security agencies. These are responsible for ensuring compliance with public health recommendations, all the advisories we give as it relates to COVID-19 spread at the national as well as the state level. So these are the federal structures. So last week we talked about ensuring that state governments take more responsibility for the COVID-19 pandemic. So when I say more responsibility, it means getting them to do more, even though they already have responsibilities that are clearly outlined based on the Constitution and based on the provision of health services across the country. And these key responsibilities include collating and providing necessary information to aid the state investigate cases of COVID-19. States are also primarily responsible for the provision of treatment and isolation facilities. They are responsible directly for the clinical management of COVID-19 cases in their areas of authority. They also ensure best practice, patient care and treatment according to the guidelines set up at the national level by the NCDC. State governments are also responsible for providing PPEs, which are protective equipment for health workers in the state. But this is further supported at the federal level, but it's a primary responsibility of the state governments. And then finally, state governments are responsible for sensitizing the public on prevention measures and protocols on COVID-19. Therefore, last week when we said we will be pushing this response more and more towards the state side, we are simply re-emphasizing what the states have always been doing, rather than something new. But we intend to continue to work very closely with the states to make sure that this response goes down to the community level, because that's the only way we can make sure that the pandemic wanes as soon as possible. But of course, it's not just government. The public have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility. We all have a role to play. And what are some of those responsibilities? Obviously, this is not exhaustive, but when we are sick, we have a responsibility to ourselves and our families to contact the COVID hotline if we have any related symptoms. We must also provide state officials and healthcare workers with the facts, the necessary information that they would need, not only to treat us, but also to protect themselves from getting the infection. It's also part of our responsibility to comply with federal and state advisories, such as obeying curfews, practicing physical distancing, and wearing face masks. And finally, it's part of our civil responsibilities to cooperate and work with the security agencies as they deliver on their work. Of course, all of us need to collaborate with each other, because this is really a one government, a one community response. I hope this clarifies a few things. We do have a website. We will encourage you to continue to visit the website. It's www.statehouse.gov.ng/COVID-19, www.statehouse.gov.ng/COVID-19. Or you can email us directly at ptfcovid19@osgf.gov.ng, ptfcovid19, all one word, at osgf.gov.ng. Please keep on sending your questions and comments. We will read them and we will continue to address them as they come. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I would like to start with felicitations along the lines of our Salah greetings and come down to what today represents for us as children. So, fellow children, happy Children's Day. How are you? Many people tend to forget that we all are still children. But there are some who are, at the moment, our immediate target. Some of us have become fathers and mothers, but we are still children. In fact, this morning, we were on a Zoom call with the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, and I explained to her that we are basically her number one children. She's our stepmother. The wife of the president is the mother of all the country. And I later spoke with my sister, my half-sister, in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. And I said, it is all our job to educate our children. I'm only holding forth for all of you. So I want to use this opportunity to thank mothers. Mothers are at the head of our school system. They are the first teachers we recruit. They are the ones who tell everybody that it's time to wake up and go to school. And now that schools are closed, they are the ones acting on our behalf. Most of them have now learned how to act very well. They will wake up the children in the morning, dress them up, take them to a point and point out as if we are going to a real school. Some even take them into a car and bring them out. So mothers have learned the complete act of acting. So we thank mothers everywhere. It is also instructive that in their hands we've left many of the things that we would normally do in school. School feeding, sanitation, hygiene, and online work. So, like my colleagues at the PTF have pointed out to you, throughout this week we have been deliberating on what it will require for us to forge ahead. And on this day, that is Children's Day, it's instructive for us to explain to them what it is that we are thinking and what it is that we're working on. We want to say, number one, the material that the chairman of PTF spoke about, which is an announcement purportedly from him that we are reopening all schools on the 8th did not emanate from us. That is not true. The big organs you see here, all the big doctors, Dr. Hanire, Dr. Mamora, Dr. Isani, Dr. Ihekwazu, all these people are experts, along with WHO. So whenever I bring up all this, my logic, they will tell me, look, logic is not medicine. Until we are sure that these children can go to school, return safely, and not bring home with them this COVID material, then infect people who are more susceptible to the disease than they are, then we are running a huge risk. And God forbid, in our hurry, something happens to our children. I'm not sure how anybody will be in a position to even retrieve what has been lost. So we are not taking that risk yet. We are going to prepare as much as possible within the guidance that they offer us with their expertise, working in conjunction with the World Health Organization before we reopen schools. However, for us, the plans are staggered. The tertiary institutions operate almost under a different climate from the secondary schools and our primary schools, and I'm sure you're all aware of that. So it only is fair to understand how each one works. We need to also appreciate that currently schools as institutions of learning are closed, but people who work there are still government workers. So they are not on holiday, they are actually still working. So for tertiary institutions, when people hear that University of Ibadan had its council meeting by Zoom, we sanction it. It's not against, it's not, you can't say because they are closed, because students are not in school, they can't hold council meetings. That is legitimately their work, and that is within the ambit of what government thinks all its workers should be doing. The same way we do Zoom meetings or do online meetings, that is acceptable everywhere. We also believe that those who work in universities and other institutions should use this period to either upgrade skills, take on new courses, find out what they need to do to make their teaching and learning more impactful, and use this period. It's not a waste, and let it not go to waste. So we know that the university, polytechnics, colleges of education, all their apparatus of governance must be functioning. There is no gap in those ones. For secondary schools, we expect that those who run them, our SBMs, should be also able to be looking at what they need to do to manage them. So that when we say we are ready, there will be some readiness alongside everybody. But you must realize also that education in the constitution of our country is a concurrent matter. Because it's on the concurrent legislative list, some subnationals may not be as equipped to react at the same basis with others and at the same level at all times. So we're going to publish a specification as to what we expect COVID or post-COVID reopening to look like. We are not talking about coping with COVID. There's a difference. We've come to understand that COVID may not necessarily go away. So we expect that we will adapt. That in the presence of COVID, what do we then do? Not that in the absence of it. This is in spite of COVID, we will still have to work. So what are we going to be looking at? The same things we've asked of every other institution. And this is where primary schools will then become important. For a country that has over 115,000 primary schools, you will understand that 35,000 of these who are private must agree to set up the same standards in order to allow children to go in. Number one, we want all our children, be they at secondary, primary, tertiary institutions, to come into schools by the time they would have done physical distancing. That is a very difficult thing to achieve in children. And it might even be higher for classes. If you go to our Nigerian universities, many of the things we need for social distancing may not be available. So you may need to rethink it. For instance, which courses should be in school at which periods? We can have semesters within semesters for different departments and different faculties. It is the same we're planning for secondary school reopening. We want to bring in our JS children and SSS first. They conclude their exams, vacate the place, use as much of the space as possible, and then others can return. We'll do the same thing with primary schools, where we will now limit the number of children per class. What this may mean also is that we may have classes in the mornings and then have classes in the afternoon. So whichever is convenient for you, you will now be divided. So we'll have the whole of the infrastructure we have provided can serve us at different times. I'm not sure whether there will be classes at night, but we can just deal with morning and afternoon at the moment. That is for social distancing. To organize sports, to organize events, ones that are contactless, and the ones that we can do with in different places, and use all the infrastructure of every school, so that if libraries can be, some people will be in the field learning, some people will be in classes, some people will be at different facilities within a school at all times. So the schools will be encouraged to all retool along these lines. Apart from social distancing, we are also looking at sanitary conditions in the schools. My big boss here, the Minister of Environment, has been inspecting all the schools. We intend to fumigate all and ask that suburbs in the states use part of the money we give them to upgrade the standards of the sanitation in the place. We want to be sure that every school can deploy pedal-pushed hand wash machines, locally manufactured, because we believe that this is a period where you cannot start relying on any import. This is all our research labs have developed very good ones. We've seen very nice ones from the Polytechnic in Nekede, in Kwara, in Offa, in so many ABUs area. Everybody has developed very nice ones. So we can bring all this together and we can use that as a foundation for even national industrialization. I was at the Ministry of Science and Technology over last week, and we had a good discussion over this. That will also lead us to the sanitization booths, which we are recommending that everybody gets. The Institute of Chemical Technology in Zaria has already informed the Ministry of Science and Technology that they are able to produce internal chemicals which we can bring 2-meter booths standardized by NASENI in the Ministry of Science and Technology and allowed to be produced by companies that will be licensed by the Ministry of Trade and Investment, such that it will be available everywhere in the country in almost 200,000 locations, so that people can walk into a school and get disinfected on their way going in and be disinfected on their way coming out, so that even if they've caught anything inside, they don't live with it. Those are the kinds of plans we're looking at on a broader national picture. But like I said, this all will be synthesized, and we're only giving you some sort of forewarning so that everybody can begin to plan. Those who are listening to us from here should begin to make these plans, because we don't want to keep saying we're not ready. It's a forewarning to private and state governments that the only conditions for which we are going to be reopening anywhere is that these places become ready to receive students and bring them home safely. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. I just wanted to speak on the latest situation and development with regards to evacuees. First of all, I understand with regards to evacuees in the United Kingdom that they have been made aware through a publication from the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom here in Abuja that there will be 2 or possibly 3 flights coming into the country to evacuate British nationals. As you know, of course, the last time there was such a flight, we were able to have our people in the UK board that flight coming here. The situation with the flights now coming is that the UK government, which is effectively chartering these planes, in the contracts that they have with those companies, there are provisions not to carry anybody coming to Nigeria on that first leg. So their contract is only to carry passengers going from Abuja, from Nigeria to the United Kingdom. So it will not be possible. But furthermore, it also would not have been possible because the plans that we have in place is to use a Nigerian carrier to evacuate Nigerians from all the countries around the world where we have an evacuation operation unless it is absolutely impossible to do so. So the plan that we have and still have is that at such a time where we evacuate from the UK, that hopefully we'll be able to use a Nigerian carrier. Then the other thing is that, as you know, up to now, everybody that's coming into the country has to be quarantined for 14 days. These evacuees have had to be quarantined for 14 days at a hotel designated by government, and all the medical requirements would have been in place in respect of those hotels, undertaken by the medical authorities here. Now there's going to be a change to that procedure and that protocol, and that is going to affect the timing of any further evacuation we're going to undertake. Essentially, we will have a situation, we hope soon, thanks to, and again express our profound gratitude to Aliko Dangote and others in the private sector, have testing units put at airports. The medical people can, correct me or add to it, and so anybody that is going to be evacuated will first of all have to undergo a test from the country that they're leaving from at least 5 days before travel and not later than 9 days before travel. That will be a precondition for boarding the flight to come to Nigeria. So a pre-flight test. And if they're positive, of course, they will not be able to get on the flight. If they are negative, they can get on the flight. But arriving in Nigeria, Abuja or Lagos, Aliko Dangote and his other partners will have in place these units where they will take samples from the passengers coming off the plane, and they will retain the passports of the passengers, and the passengers, and this is the big difference now, will then be able to go home and not into a prescribed hotel to self-isolate. Results from those samples would then be available within a day or two. And those who are positive, of course, will be taken in for isolation into isolation centers. And those who are negative will then have to spend more days to complete the 14-day period, after which they can come, collect their passport, and go their way. But as I said, all this will be taking place in their own premises, under self-isolation. So the whole issue of quarantining in hotels will no longer be necessary. This will probably also mean that we can be, more people will be able to come back, hopefully. The frequency of, of the evacuations, and it'll be, a lot easier and less wieldy than it has been up to now. So, what we've been asked to do essentially is to suspend all evacuations for now until this new structure is put into place, and hopefully, we're very hopeful that maybe by next week we should be able to commence evacuations. But as I said, the fact that isolation at home, and then the possibility of now going to Lagos, as the large number of evacuees prefer to go to Lagos, we believe that should make things also much easier for all concerned, including the evacuees. And then maybe just an update. I'm sure some of you have, or most of you have seen in the media, after the evacuees from Saudi Arabia, who are still now going through their quarantine, we also, in cooperation with the government of Lebanon, were able to evacuate, in total, actually 69 Nigerians, 50 trafficked Nigerian girls from Lebanon, and 19 other Nigerians, and they all arrived safely and are in quarantine. We again, express our thanks to the government of Lebanon for helping to facilitate this, and also the Lebanese community in Nigeria, who actually funded the cost of the flight and cost of hotel for the 50 trafficked girls. And I think that this was obviously showing also their disapproval of a lot of what has been happening in their country with respect to these trafficked girls. So they are now also in quarantine, and so far so good. And then the other batch of evacuees, you'll recall the batch from the United States, and the batch from the, I think it was the United Kingdom. We've also been able to return their test results, and they've all been able to now leave quarantine. And those that needed to go to Lagos, arrangements were made, and they were able to fly to Lagos. So all we have at the moment are the evacuees from Saudi Arabia and the evacuees from Lebanon. We know that there's a large number of Nigerians still waiting to be evacuated. In addition to London, of course, there's China, and that's been a real issue because the circumstances are ones that we're not altogether happy about. We've discussed that in the past, and it's a real priority for us to get all the evacuees back, but we know that those in China are facing very special challenges, and it's a real priority for us. And as soon as this mechanism is put in place, I would like to assure them that we will do everything possible to prioritize their return. Of course, we have evacuees from almost all over the world. We as Nigerians, we travel all over the world, and they're all priorities. The U.S. has a large number that are still wanting to come back, and of course the U.K., France, Turkey, Sudan, Malaysia, or Thailand. So we still have a lot of work to do. But this new mechanism, I think, gives us greater flexibility and will make it possible, hopefully, to be able to bring back more of our people without too much of the constraints. Because, of course, one of the major constraints in the past has been the limited number of hotel space available. But they will be able to come back as quickly as they can be tested on arrival at the airport. That's really the only constraint that we'll have in bringing them back. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the PTF, ladies and gentlemen and ladies of the press, good evening. Just a little update from the Federal Ministry of Environment. By now, we have commenced decontamination and disinfection in all the 36 states, specifically the 6 geopolitical zones and FCT, making the 7. What we intend to do is to go zone by zone. We have enough teams that will be working simultaneously because a lot of businesses or schools will be opening, so we are making sure that we are working concurrently in all the areas. Specifically, I would like to dwell on the issues of reopening schools, and that I will do in Hausa, because it's very important, as the Minister has mentioned, that we take care of our schools. We make sure that they are totally decontaminated and disinfected before the children move in, as they are our asset. Jama'a assalamu alaikum. Ina so ne dan yi bayani akan abubuwan da ma'aikatan muhalli ta yi daga baya zuwa yanzu. Da farko dai ina ma kowa barka da sallah, da fatan an yi sallah lafiya. A yanzu dai mun fara ayyuka a dukkan shiyoyin ƙasar nan guda 6 har da babban birnin ƙasa. Amma ina so ne in magana musamman akan buɗe makarantu. Mutane kila suna tunanin to yaushe za a buɗe makarantu, da na firamare ne, da na gaba da firamare, da jami'o'i, kuma in an buɗe ya zai kasance, yaya yaranmu. Wannan abu ne wanda yake wannan kwamiti ya zauna ya yi tunani a tsare-tsaren yadda za a buɗe, kamar yadda kwanakin baya aka sassauta dokan zaman gida aka yadda a fito awa kaza, to makarantu su tsarin yadda zai shi ma dole akwai nashi tsarin. Idan kuka duba a nan yadda kuke kallon mu za ku ga yadda aka wawware kujeru. To tsarin ita wannan cuta kamar yadda muka faɗa baya shine a tabbatar ana tsaftace hannuwa, a tabbatar ana bayar da tazara wajen mu'amala da dukkan sauran abubuwa. To abin da zai faru a makarantu kenan. Bayan mun tabbatar da cewa mun tsaftace su, an yi feshi, to kuma dole za a sake sabon tsari ne a wajen zama. Yanda da yara suke zama kusa da juna ba zai yiwu ba, domin kasashen duniya da suka fara buɗewa abin da suka yi kenan, kuma ana samun wato ci gaba a kai. Saboda haka za ku ga cewa an cancanza, dole a rage yawan azuzuwa wanda da ana dunkule wuri guda. Dole a san tsarin da za a yi a canza domin a tabbatar da cewa wannan tazara ɗin da ake magana wajen mu'amala an samu. Kuma idan muka tsara waɗannan tun daga matakin firamare har zuwa sakandare zuwa jami'a, abu ne wanda yake dole sai an yi sabon tsari, kamar yadda na ce ba lalai bane ɗakuna ko kuma azuzuwan da ake da su isa. Saboda haka har ila akwai sabon tsari. Wannan cuta ta zo da abubuwa, kwanaki na yi bayani da cewa me idan zamani ya zo sai ka san yadda za ka bi. to an ce sanin halin mutum sai ka ci maganin zama da shi. Yanzu mun san tsarin corona, sai mu san irin yadda za mu yi domin mu zauna lafiya. Kuma ɗaya daga cikinsu shine wannan abubuwan da za mu yi makarantunmu don saboda mu tabbatar yaranmu sun je makaranta lafiya sun dawo lafiya ba tare da sun samu wani abu. Duk waɗannan tsare-tsaren da ake yi, Allah ya kiyaye, ko da ba a sani ba da akwai wani da yake da wannan cuta, idan aka bi waɗannan tsare-tsare kowa yana saye da wannan takunkumi ɗin, domin a makarantun ma za a sa, domin muna gani. Har ila yau akwai kuma wani tsari da shi ma duka ana yi dai, wanda zai ƙara tabbatar da lafiyan yara kafin ma su shiga aji. In suka zo akwai tsari na yadda za a fesa musu abin da za a tsaftace jikinsu, ko da waɗansu ƙwayoyin cuta, wannan magani zai iya kashe waɗannan ƙwayoyin cuta ba tare da kuma ya cutar da yaro ba. Domin ina jin ki da yawan ku sun gani ma a talabijin yanda ake shiga ake wucewa kamar ta ɗan wani kwararo haka, wanda za ku ga kamar ana fesa tiriri ko hayaki ko wani abu. Wannan abu ne wanda yake yana kashe duk waɗansu ƙwayoyin cuta da za su kasance a jikin mutum, har ita wannan ƙwayar cutar corona ɗin. To akwai tsari na duba yadda za a yi ma a makarantu da offices da wuraren da ya kamata a yi wannan cuta ne wanda ta zo kuma ta addabi duniya, kuma duk abin da aka yi a waccan ƙasa, in dai abin a hana wannan yaɗuwar cutar ne, to daidai haka za a yi a wata ƙasa. Ko da yake kowace ƙasa da ƙarfinta, akwai kuma tsare-tsare yadda za a yi dai a tabbatar an yi wani abu da zai kare lafiyan al'umma. To makarantu idan lokacin buɗe su yayi, tsarin da za a bi kenan. Yana da kyau ku sani, shi yasa shi ministan ilimi ya ɗauki lokaci ya yi cikakken bayani. Mu kuma Allah da za mu tabbatar mun feshe waɗannan makarantu domin mu kare yaranmu. Amma wannan kuma daga iyaye su ma akwai nasu rawar da za su taka. Dole ne su gaya ma yara su bi tsarin da aka sa su bi, ba a sa yaro wani abu bai je na wani abu daban. Iyaye suna da rawar da za su taka muhimmiya, domin wani abu ne wanda yake gwamnati ba za ta iya yi ita kadai ba, dole sai da haɗin kai. Kama wannan dokan zaman gidan da wani lokaci mutane za su yi ta kwaranniyan son fitowa, don mu ake yi, ba wai kawai don jin daɗi ba. Wannan na faɗa kashi ɗaya, kashi biyu, kashi uku, kuma kila za ku sake ji, domin wannan cutar fa tana nan tukuna. Ba mu san ran da za a ce ta tafi mun koma muna yawon mu, muna jin daɗin mu, muna shargallan mu yadda muka saba ba. Zai ɗauki lokaci. To gara mu koya mu saba, ya zamana kaman wani cikon abu ne na rayuwarmu na yau da kullum. In muka bi cikin lokaci kalilan, Allah yadda wannan cutar za ta wuce, za mu iya komawa. Amma in ba mu yarda mun ba, to shine fa za a dinga samun matsala, tana karuwa tana yaduwa. Allah ya ba mu ikon bin tsare-tsare da dokokin da ya kamata mu don kare kanmu da yaranmu. Assalamu alaikum.
The update session, we shall now take your questions. If you're ready. Okay.
Good evening, sir. My name is Friday Okeribu. I'm a reporter with Channels TV. I'd like to direct my first question to the Minister of Foreign Affairs regarding the update he gave concerning the evacuees from United Kingdom and the United Arab Emirates. The test that came in, those who were negative have been reunited with their families, if I got you right. I'd like to know how many of them tested positive for COVID-19 in terms of number. My second question, I would appreciate if the Minister of Health or the DG NCDC can actually provide answer to that. It has to do with the index case in Benue that was discharged last week. A recorded video on the day she was discharged, which of course a press release from the National Hospital made available to journalists also supported, shows that at the point she was discharged, she was still positive. She was not negative. But a statement that was sent by the hospital says that she's discharged because she has stayed beyond 45 days. I'd like to get further clarification. Does that mean that if someone who is positive stays beyond 45 days without showing any symptom, he can no longer transmit that disease to someone else? Or what is the rationale behind discharging her when she's still testing positive for the virus? Thank you.
Good evening, members of the PTF. My name is Juliana Taiwo Balonya. I'm with the Sun newspapers. Minister of Foreign Affairs, I would like an update on the Canadian evacuees, the issues with air peace. I would like to know what's the update. And second one is, though you have said something about China, I would like to know, you did promise to seek compensation where necessary from the Chinese government because of the way our citizens there have been treated. So I would like to get an update on that. The coordinator, please, I'd like you to react to the assault. A doctor on essential duty was assaulted in Port Harcourt on her way to work, and her community, Polo Pubu in Delta State, is demanding justice and wants to know what the PTF is doing because she was on essential duty when she was assaulted. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the PTF, my colleagues, good afternoon. My name is Nancy Oyedia, or I'm from AIT. So I want to start with you, the SGF. A journalist had an investigative investigation across the city center, and he actually found out that security personnel who are stationed at the Eagle Square, now there are 7 under the federal government, not the FCT, have not been paid their allowances. Now their counterpart, there are 7 under the FCT, got some form of palliative and allowances. The 7 under the federal government said they don't have masks. So I want to ask, is there a way we can engage security chiefs on allowances for this security personnel, because they are critical stakeholder in the fight against COVID-19, so that they are not unduly induced with paltry sums? Now my next question goes to the Minister of Education. So during this lockdown, you've spoken so much about e-learning. You talked about radio, television, and also internet. Now, for those who are going to be learning through the radio and television, I know that education is not a one-way traffic. You give and you get response from the student. How do you intend to get this feedback mechanism from these children? Mr. Digisa, the last time your team went to Kogi State, it wasn't a palatable one. So I want to know, have you made any other effort to lend helping hand to Kogi State? And finally, to the Minister of Environment, I know that the Minister of Education said there are plans to decontaminate schools. I want to know, these schools, the private schools, are they also involved in this decontamination? Because there have been several allegations. A lot of people said that AEPB are charging them 120,000, some said millions. I want to know, for private businesses who want to decontaminate their offices, how do they go about it? Thank you.
Good evening, sir, the chairman of PTF and the members. My name is Musa Aminu from Voice of Nigeria. I'm going to ask in Hausa language. Okay. There are some states that didn't obey the lockdown during Salah celebration. And the chairman of the PTF said the school will open, or rather the Minister of Education, the school will open soon. Does that involve those states that didn't obey the lockdown order? So abin da nake tambaya shine, akwai jihohin da ba su bi dokan wato azama gida ba lokacin bikin sallah, kuma an ce makaranta zai bude nan ba da jimawa ba. Shin wannan doka ya shafe su, bude makarantu zai shafe su ne, ko akwai wani mataki da za a dauka a kansu?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the PTF, my colleagues. My name is Mohammed Salih Nazif. I work for Voice of Nigeria. My question goes to PTF Chairman. Sir, recently, there is a recent focus by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations that's FAO, which indicated a risk of locust invasion in West African countries from next month, that is June, down to September. What is the federal government and state government doing in preparedness and anticipatory actions plans to control this ugly development? We know, especially we that came from the northern part of the country, even from this northeast, Mr. Chairman, you will confirm to that. Whenever this locust crosses our border, it causes a lot of damage to our food productions. Is there anything, because of this forecast, June to September, anything government doing towards that aspect to control it? Thank you.
The chairman of the PTF, members of the team, my colleagues. My name is Amaka Ode. I report for Arise News. Well, my first question actually goes to the Minister of State for Health. So I want to get an update on the hazard allowance and insurance for frontline workers. I'm asking for an update because the last time I asked the Minister of Health on the implementation date, he said that was still being worked on. And I'm sure you're aware of the situation in Jos, where the nurses have actually withdrawn their services from the isolation centers because, according to them, no hazard allowance, no insurance. So we need an update on that. And also, I know that the Ministry of Health, there was a committee of experts that was set up. What are they telling us about the strains of COVID-19 in the country? I ask this question because some experts, epidemiologists who are Nigerians, they say if we know the strains of COVID-19 that we currently have, this will help us reduce our case fatality rate. So what is this committee telling you that can help us reduce that? And my next question actually goes to the DG of the NCDC. Let me start, first of all, with an update concerning the reagents you told us we're expecting. Are they in the country now? Have you received them? And how much boost have we gotten in terms of our number of test kits in the country that we know some states have continued to lament about not having enough? And also, the last time I asked you about how much each test cost, you told us it was between $15 and $20. And Lagos said they have conducted 16,000 tests, costing them about 800 million naira. The Commissioner of Health, Professor Akin Abayomi, says it costs them between 40 to 50,000 naira per test. So I want to know why there's a difference between their cost for tests and that of the NCDC. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. Rachel Abuja from the News Agency of Nigeria. My first question is to the Minister of State Health. Sir, you made mention of research. I would like to know the area or topic being considered for funding apart from the alternative medicine. My next question is for the coordinator. Sir, I would like to know if we're looking at acquiring a contingency reserve for inventories like PPEs, ventilators, and other consumables. And I also want you to share the national inventory as of today. And if you can make that available regularly for Nigerians. The national inventories as of today. Can you hear me, sir? Yes. My last question is for the DG NCDC. Sir, I believe the study you just spoke about is from Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. And while you are looking at it, I would also like you to put in consideration our treatment centers and our trial drug regimen. And also, this will also be like people coming in with suspected cases now, we may have to reduce the days, and quarantine persons have to reduce. So all of this should be put in consideration too. Meanwhile, WHO does not recommend the wearing of face masks for healthy people. I don't know how this aligns with our guidelines for face covering. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good evening, the chairman and members of the Presidential Task Force and Nigerians at home. I am Mitaire Ikben. I report for the NTA. My first question is to the DG of the NCDC. There have been reports viral on social media of mysterious deaths in Bonny, River State. I want to know if you have launched any investigation, any preliminary investigation as to the cause of these deaths and if they are related to COVID-19. I want to ask the Minister of Health, at the moment, is there any advisory that your ministry can give to Nigerians on what they should do or not do to prevent contracting the coronavirus during the wet season? I ask this question because the pattern of what we saw in Europe was that there was a spike during the cold season, and as Europe progressed towards summer, it appeared there was a drop in their cases. So is there a pattern of COVID-19 thriving during the wet season? And if there is, what advisory do you have for Nigerians during the wet season? And again, I want to ask the Minister of Health if there's any update on the interface with Kogi and Cross River states concerning their no-case status. Are you still convinced about the no-case status of Cross River and Kogi states? I want to ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs, what's the number of Nigerian returnees currently in your custody at the moment, and how many are positive or negative for coronavirus? And finally, I want to ask the chairman of the Presidential Task Force and Secretary to Government, what impact is COVID-19 likely to have on our electoral process? Is it likely to facilitate our quest for e-voting in Nigeria? Thank you.
Good evening, the SGF, Honorable Minister, DG NCDC, and my colleagues. My name is Rahila Lassa. I report for Voice of Nigeria. My first question goes to the Minister of State Education. Some schools are yet to commence the online classes as instructed by the Federal Ministry of Education. I want to know what's the fate of these children, seeing that they have the same calendar and same syllabus when school resumes. And is there a way that the Federal Ministry of Education tracks schools to ensure that the online classes are going on? And if not, what happens to the defaulters? Secondly, my question goes to the NCDC boss. Aside transporters, I want to know if any other organization, especially religious groups, have sent in their guidelines to the NCDC as regards the reopening of the lift on the ban, yes, on bans or lift on restrictions. And I want to know if the NCDC is meeting with them to ensure strict compliance with the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. That sums up the question session. We shall group. Then we shall take the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Minister of Environment, and the Honorable Minister of State Education before the SGF rounds it up. We begin now with the Honorable Minister of State for Health.
Well, let me thank those who have had the opportunity to make interventions. And I will try to attend to your queries. I think the first question maybe to me, maybe to NCDC from That's from Friday, channels. Yes, you were asking about the patient recently discharged from the National Hospital after having stayed in there for a prolonged period. Specifically, you mentioned 45 days. And that, is it proper to have discharged even when she still tested negative, positive as at that time? Well, what we know is that for some reasons, certain patients may not easily stop, quote unquote, shedding the virus. That is, they have a prolonged period of viral load shedding. And that could be one of such cases. But let me say that her discharge was predicated on a follow-up. She was asked to self-isolate, so it's a kind of supervised self-isolation. Because since she was on admission, she wasn't manifesting any symptoms to start with. And she wasn't going bad in any way. And also, she wasn't taking medications, which is not unusual. There are people, even without taking any medications, they will still recover. And of course, knowing fully well that there is no cure and no specific treatment for COVID-19. A patient with COVID-19 will rely largely on his or her immune response or system to overcome and overwhelm the virus. Whatever treatment that is given so far is only supportive. So, that is the situation, and hoping that somehow, somewhere along the line, she will still be tested and she will return a negative test. It's also important to say that coronavirus, particularly as COVID-19, is still being studied. So every day you're having research work published. That is, we continue to rely on science, we rely on data, and we rely on evidence. And one of the latest findings is that there may be some viral particles still left in the patient's system, which will be picked up when the test is done. So she may have been one of such patients. I'm sure Dr. Chikwe and the national coordinator will probably talk more about this. But I think from my own end, that is the bit I can say. Nancy, I think, I'm not sure your question is really for me, but you're asking about what the situation in Kogi. Kogi, okay, it's meant for NCDC. Thank you very much for sparing me. Amaka, I'm not too sure your second question, is it about the strain of virus, you said? Okay, I just want to be sure. Right. Okay. Now, one of the things that we have not made too much noise about is what we are able to do within. I can confirm to you that from the Nigeria Institute of Medical Research, working in collaboration with some other institutions here in the country, they have been able to establish that the strain we have here is the same as the strain in Wuhan when it was first discovered. So that has been established, and we know that. The genetic sequencing has been established to that effect. So is that strain that we know for now. Your second question has to do with hazard allowance. You recall that when I first presented this issue, I did say that we had MOU signed onto by the officials of the Ministry of Health. I led the team from Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Labor and Employment, the National Salaries and Wages Commission, then the NMA, the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, the nurses, Nigerian nurses and midwives, and then the medical laboratory scientists, and a whole lot of other bodies under JUHESU. Now, the decision as at that time was to try not to reinvent the wheel. That is, going by what was already in place by way of the hazard allowance, and which dated back to 1991. So the decision was to suspend that because it's scandalous, so to speak. To suspend that and then come up with a new rate to cover this period, and also have some kind of inducement. In addition to other things that have been put in place, like the Employees Compensation Act, and of course the group life insurance as well. Now, along the line, there was need to harmonize all this and ensure that the names of those that will be covered will reflect on the IPPS platform, so that payment can just be made directly. And I am aware that that negotiation is still on because of certain developments along the line. As we speak right now, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health is right at a meeting in this regard. And I do hope that before the end of the week, the final outcome will be made available, which we will let you know. Rachel Nan was asking that what are the other areas of research aside the medicinal plants that we know of or that we are working on at the moment with the traditional medical practitioners and herbal practitioners. Now, we're still working on drugs. Don't forget that even the chloroquine is still being worked on as we speak. It's important for us to make it clear that the WHO, as the world body that regulates issues that affect health, the WHO does not dictate to countries as to what to do. They only provide guidance and guidelines, not dictate. Because the reality is that each country is expected to look at those realities on ground and leave room for innovation, leave room for flexibility, and then leave room for adaptation as dictated by the realities on ground in each country. So, we're still looking at the issues of drugs. We're still looking at the issues of vaccine as well in the area of research. Oftentimes, what we get is that this is what is happening in America, this is what is happening in Britain, but we need to have our own figures based on science, based on evidence, and of course, based on research. For example, I'm sure some of you will have read that in some of the countries abroad, they have established that COVID-19 tends to be more prevalent in certain blood groups. One of the researches going on here is to determine our own situation. Is it true that in certain blood groups you have COVID-19 more, whether it is blood group O or A or B or AB? This is part of the research that is going on in our own situation. I just mentioned earlier on the issue of the strain, because viruses have a way of just changing their nature from one strain to the other. But I've just told you that one of the researches that has come out of our own situation is establishing that what we have here is the same strain that we had, at the inception in Wuhan. So those are some of the research work going on here in Nigeria. Etaire, I hope I got the name right. Etaire. Etaire. Okay. I'd rather call you Ekwen, right? Okay, thank you. So, your question is what to do or not to do with the rains coming. Unfortunately, we never had this before. You would need a cycle for you to be able to establish that this is what will happen this time around. This is just the first experience. So we didn't have COVID last year. During the rains last year, as to be able to say this was what happened then. So we have to wait and see. But having said that, the usual or the routine advisories should still be kept faith with. That is, washing of hands with soap and water under running water, use of sanitizers, alcohol-based, use of face mask, avoiding gathering, physical distancing, and all the other advices that we'll be giving. So we want Nigerians to continue to follow these advisories. Yes, it's been said that there is a possibility that high temperature, humid environment, and what have you may aid. But again, these are some of the things that have been said. But regarding what we know, I think the advice is that keep to those advisories and maintain the hygiene, both personal hygiene and respiratory hygiene. I think that's my response to that. The second question is the update on Cross River and Kogi. Well, Kogi is yet to be visited the second time, but I can say that we have a better understanding with the government of Kogi this time around, and we're hoping that when the team visits Kogi, we will have a better report based on better understanding. For Cross River, yes, we want to commend the governor for welcoming the team and for the collaboration that took place, and better understanding as well. But essentially the findings at the end of the visit, they revolve around the issues of security at the border, inadequacy of surveillance system, and the low capacity for testing because of dearth of personnel to make this testing possible. Of course, what was also observed was that the call center is probably not what it should be. It is yet to, it's still being set up as at that point in time. The situation may have changed now because this was a report about 2 weeks ago. There was also the issue of difficulty in shipping test samples from Cross River to Irua, which is possibly the nearest center, the Irua Reference Lab, taking these samples from Calabar to, so logistics issue was one of the other things observed in Cross River. But at the end of it all, there were discussions around how to mitigate these gaps and challenges. And like I said earlier on, we want to acknowledge the cooperation of the governor of the state in trying to ensure that we both work on the same page, that is, between the federal and the state authorities, with a view to getting things done properly for the good of us all. Thank you very much.
Keep mine very short so we can all go home. I think the first question, Friday, on the 45 days, I think my minister has answered it. If it was now, the patients would not have stayed 45 days. That's the impact of the science coming out now, that the virus is not viable after 10 to 14 days. But the test can remain positive. So if we knew now what we knew, if we knew 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago what we know now, she wouldn't have stayed 45 days. But that is how new knowledge emerges and influences your decisions. On Kogi State, like I've always said, we are focused on supporting all the states in the country. And our focus will continue to be states requesting and the people living in those states. Every day, almost every single day, I'm having discussions, calls from governors pushing for labs, pushing for treatment centers, pushing for commodities, IPC, technical support, guidance, knowledge. So our hands are full dealing with states asking for our support. The purpose for our existence is to support the state, and we'll continue to do so. The third was on the positive in returnees. Yes, we've had only 3 positives in that first flight that came back, I think, through Lagos. All the ones that were tested in Abuja over the last few days have all been negative and discharged home to rejoin their families. In terms of reagents, at the moment we have reagents to test over 100,000 people in our stockpile. So the challenge now is not reagents, the challenge is really to work with states to reinvigorate the sample collection process. And this is our focus, the focus of our work this week. I sent out a message to all state commissioners, commissioners of health in all the states and all their state epidemiologists over the summer holiday to really focus this week on getting in more samples so that we know where they are. In Imo State, we just saw a small but significant increase in the number of cases because of their increased testing and the fact that they now have a lab in Owerri. So we can see how the availability of a lab and proximity to testing changes the response. On the cost per test, this is really sometimes not as simple as you think because it depends on what you include in the cost. So if you ask how much it costs to put this event together, you can just cost some of the operational costs. But if you now cost all the time and our opportunity cost, the human resources, the electricity, the generator, the air conditioners, you come up with a completely different set of costs. So it really depends what we are costing and what the Lagos State Commissioner is costing when he's referring to the cost of tests. The cost of tests for one individual in terms of reagents is still about $20. You can convert that to Naira. But if you now add the cost of equipment, human resources, generator, internet, and all those are important for keeping the service working, hazard allowance and all that, then you come up with a different set of costs. So the $20 cost per test is basically what it costs to pay for the reagents and commodities required for that single test. Rachel, excellent. I'm happy that you're doing a lot of reading in your spare time. Yes, that study came out of Singapore. We encourage your colleagues to all do the same, and I'm sure they all are. There will be a lot of masters in public health to be awarded after this session of our work in Nigeria. The question about the WHO statement on face masks. It's not that WHO says that face masks are not to be used by the healthy. I think what they're saying, and if you read their guidance carefully, is that face masks don't really, the value of face masks is protecting those that do have the virus at the early stages of their infection from preventing others, or from infecting others. That is the biggest value that face masks have. So if you're in a room where the person that is infected is not wearing a mask, and you are wearing a mask, that mask might not protect you. The biggest value is if you are infected and in early stages and you don't know, that's the biggest value of a mask, and that's why it's important for everybody to wear a mask, and that's where the real value of masks come in, especially when you're outside your home. Yes, we had the report in Bonny, and we are testing at the moment. We've sent a team there, they've collected samples. The samples have arrived in the lab in Rivers State, in Rivers University Teaching Hospital, so we should know by tomorrow or next if it's COVID or not. And finally, we're supporting many sectors in their guidelines. Where's my sister that asked the question? Okay, yeah, just behind you. We're supporting many sectors in doing the guidelines. And these are not only those that asked us, we're also proactively writing and supporting specific big sectors. Aviation, education, these are ones that we can't wait to be asked in terms of how we support. So we're going to actually approach them and offer our guidance and support. But in this case, really, you will see that everybody in the world is grappling with the same issues because they're not straightforward. And there's often not enough scientific evidence to base all our decisions on. So at some point, our leaders have to make very tough decisions. But that's why we elect them as leaders, to direct us and to make those hard decisions. Do we open or not? Schools, airports, train stations, and rely on us to enable the safety of what they've advised us to do. Of course, airports are easier than schools because we generally think that adults are more adherent than children. That is not always the case, but that is the general assumption, and that's what makes the reopening of schools so difficult, because the whole idea of keeping 2 meters apart is not something most children really would easily understand. And sometimes not all adults understand either. So thank you very much.
The doctor that was assaulted while on essential duty, and we are hearing this for the first time, but any sort of assault is unacceptable. It's an unfortunate situation. We hope it will be investigated by the relevant authorities, and we will keep on asking all law enforcement agents to make sure that they treat members of the public in a humane and respectful manner. We haven't been approached yet, but we hope the person affected will put in unnecessary complaints through the usual channels, and this will be addressed by the security agencies. In terms of the question about the different strains of COVID-19 and whether or not we are looking at these strains, so far, at the moment, there's no strong scientific evidence that the two strains, we have the L strain and the S strain of coronavirus. There's no strong scientific evidence that these two strains behave in different ways when it comes to the severity of illness. As with all viruses, we know that as they multiply, as they replicate, there's always error within their nucleic acid. And this error accumulates over time, and the error could lead to either the virus becoming weaker, such as with HIV, or sometimes it could become even more potent. But generally speaking, with mutations, what usually happens is if you have a drug or a vaccine that affects, that targets a specific viral protein, and that viral protein changes because of mutation, then that interaction between the viral protein and the drug or the vaccine will weaken, and therefore the vaccine will become less effective. But these are still early days in terms of research, and there's certainly no strong evidence that the two different strains of coronavirus behave differently in the host. With regards to Rachel's always difficult questions about reserves for PPE quantification. So we have done a complete quantification of our needs as a country. We are discussing with the donor community. I don't have a figure for you at the moment in terms of what our current amount is. Rachel, if I did, I'll be a working calculator, but we can get that data for you, certainly. As you're probably aware, it's a dynamic and fluid situation. What I can say is that we have more PPE now in country than we used to have. So we are in a much better position. NCDC usually deal with the logistics side of PPEs, and they have an automated system that allows them to keep some contingency reserves in place in case other parts of the country need such material urgently. And then finally, I wanted to clarify what the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs said with regards to people coming in country and being quarantined. And as the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs said, the proposed changes are not in effect yet. They will only come into effect when everything is in place. So for the moment, if you are coming in country, the current arrangements stand. You will be quarantined for 14 days. The people that are currently quarantined are not going to be discharged on the basis of this proposed changes. We have not started implementing them, and as he said, it will require some form of testing before even boarding the flights. So this is still work in progress, and we are yet to put this in place. So just to clarify really and make that very clear to the public. Thank you.
Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are a number of questions there. Okay, also what the national coordinator just mentioned, of course I did say that that all this has to be in place first. But of course, there's a backlog of people waiting to come into the country. And my understanding, again, he might wish to clarify this, is that we are to suspend all evacuations until this new protocol comes into place. But if there is a change of policy, that evacuations can continue pending the coming into place of the new policy, then of course we will start looking at evacuating Nigerians. But the understanding and the directives we got was that all evacuations are to be suspended until this new policy comes into place. So the situation of evacuees coming in to spend 14 days in quarantine would not arise, because we've been directed to halt all evacuations until the new policy comes into place. Now, the other questions that I received was how many positive tests were recorded amongst all those who have come into, all the evacuees that have come into the country. Of course, you know that we had evacuees from the UAE, the UK, the US, Saudi Arabia, and Lebanon. And to the best of my knowledge, only the 3 cases that were reported in respect of the UAE in Lagos were the only positive tests that we had. So all the others were negative. Then also the other question was about the Canadian evacuees and Air Peace. Now the situation there, as you all may or may not know, is that Air Peace had wanted to go and evacuate a large number of Nigerians, and possibly also evacuate Canadian nationals from here and take them to Canada. There was an issue with the landing clearance for Air Peace. Our High Commission in Canada engaged with the Canadian authorities. I called in here in Abuja the Canadian High Commissioner to understand why Air Peace was not being given landing clearance. And the explanation, and I won't go into the details of it, was essentially that Air Peace did not have a track record of going to Canada, and so the whole profile of the carrier needed to be fully ascertained in respect of all the important aspects, security, and so forth. And I was informed that the process of getting an eventual approval would obviously be a long one. And so essentially, it was not possible for Air Peace to go and evacuate these Nigerians. But what is not correct is that we had now allowed another airline to bring those Nigerians back. That's not correct. What the situation is we're exploring with Nigerian carriers to see what kind of arrangements they can make amongst themselves, and looking at other options that they would be involved in identifying for the evacuation of those Nigerians. So, we have not taken a decision to allow a foreign carrier to bring those Nigerians back. The third question was in regards to compensation to Nigerians who were caught up in Guangzhou during the crisis, that seemed to be targeting Africans with respect to having tested positive, and also with actions that were considered also discriminatory on the basis of nationality and race. What I did in that case was I spoke to the Consul General, our consular representative in Guangzhou, who was in direct contact with the Nigerians there, and asked that he should contact the Nigerians involved or make it known to them to provide details of any loss they might have suffered and any other claims that they might have, and to provide that to the ministry, and we would engage on that basis with the Chinese. And I might add that when I summoned the Chinese ambassador, he also made this commitment that they would be very interested to receive the details of any complaints of loss or whatever. And I must say that to date, nothing has come in formally from our consulate in Guangzhou. Then the other question was, again, number of evacuees who tested positive, which I've just responded to, and also how many evacuees have returned. The evacuees that have come within the framework of this PTF program, because there have been sort of small individual cases of people coming in, but not within the framework that we are responsible for. I would say around 1,000 persons have come in from 5 countries. And that's not counting the land border, where you recall about 100 or so people came in. We brought in through the land border. Thank you very much.
Minister Environment.
I think most of the questions have been dealt with. With regards to the security allowances that Nancy asked, I want to assure you that everybody that is involved in this national response, either as a frontline medical worker or a security agent, everything humanly possible will be done to ensure that the little stipends that they are entitled to as allowances will be paid. It's just a matter of process, and I can assure you that that is being processed. You are aware of the fact that the National Assembly is even cutting short its recess to reconvene tomorrow to consider the 2020 adjustment in the budget. You don't begin to apply certain amounts of money. You wait for certain approvals, and I believe that as we are processing it, by the time that the leadership of the National Assembly consider whatever adjustments that are going to be made in the budgets of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which has become of necessity because of the economic impact of COVID-19, I can assure you that everybody will be paid their little entitlements. It might not be commensurate to what is expected, but as a sign of understanding and also regard for the people that have been in the front line, these allowances will be paid. Schools opening, I didn't say soon. I was very careful about the choice of my words, and I believe that the Minister of State Education too didn't say soon. And I know that you always get a copy of my statement. If you look at paragraph 5 and paragraph 6, I was very, very careful about the choice of my words. And I said that we will put all measures in place for safe reopening of our schools. And that the Minister of State was going to make clarification on that in the same paragraph 5. And in paragraph 6, I was also very, very careful about urging states, local governments, proprietors, and other stakeholders to begin to take steps that will facilitate an early and safe reopening. An early and safe reopening. That is very, very important, because we do not want to use our children as prospective carriers of this virus when they congregate in their schools and when they return home. The elderly, the weak, the sick, people who have comorbidity that we are trying to protect, we use them as carriers to come back home and infect the elderly and those that fall into the category of the 20% that we've been doing everything to ensure that we secure them and protect them, because they are the ones that are likely to fall severely sick. And the fatalities too are a percentage of the 20% that if we do not do everything humanly possible to secure, we would expose them. There was a question, I think, which I'm supposed to respond to in Hausa, but let me answer in English, that has to deal with the predictions of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is an organization under the United Nations. It's very, very true. We are expecting an invasion of locusts, particularly in the northern part of the country. And the federal government was proactive. On the 11th of March, that was the second to the last physical Federal Executive Council that we held. A decision was taken. A memo was presented by the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, where he had brought for consideration, and it was taken and approved, a total sum of about 13.9 billion naira to deal with transport pest and surveillance and monitoring, and also control of transboundary animal and pest diseases, and rehabilitation of major abattoirs to provide for sanitation in those places. That memo was taken and passed at the Federal Executive Council of 11th March 2020. So we are trying as much as possible to ensure that, and I believe that it is at the point of execution now that we take control of the invasion of particularly locusts at this time of the cropping season, because the invasion of locusts can be very devastating for places that particularly depend on grains and sorghum and other forms of cultivation. So I think that is a thing that we have taken care of. A contract has been, the council has approved the award of these contracts. And finally, Mitare, you asked whether the National Electoral Commission is moving towards the processes of enshrining e-voting in the country. I can say yes, that is the future. Whether we like it or not, we must begin to make preparation going in that direction. And I can tell you that this did not start today. In my few years, I've had the privilege of serving in 2 of the several constitutional conferences. I first served in 1988 as a member of the Constituent Assembly that framed the 1989 Constitution under the Babangida regime. And I knew that was a very strong subject of discussion. How do we reduce the costs of our elections? Not only the cost of campaigns by the candidates, but the cost of even conduct of the elections. Because we realize that we spend billions and billions of naira in buying ballot boxes, in printing ballot papers for all forms of elections. And that was a major source of discussion at that moment. But we came to the conscious realization that our infrastructure was not able to carry the processes of electronic voting. Don't forget, in 1988, there were no smartphones. We didn't even have, except for landlines, you didn't have any form of communication. Even trial was not in place at that moment. So because of that, and the lack of adequate infrastructure, we were unable at that constitutional conference, able to push through the issue of e-voting or electronic voting. Then I had also the privilege under Obasanjo in 2005 to serve as a member of the National Political Reform Conference. And that was quite a very, very contentious issue, because Obasanjo had sent a team, I think headed by Jerry Gana, to India to overstudy their transition from manual voting to e-voting. And the Indian experience was such that they started to stagger their elections and started to apply those processes. And the Indian team that they met with in India came and visited us during the processes of the National Political Reform Conference that was that we had in 2005. We also looked at that. And I think one of the agencies under the Ministry of Science and Technology there, Nasina, I think, Nasima, yes, one of the agencies, I think, also had developed a process of electronic voting. And we did a trial of that during the processes of the Nasima, during the processes of the National Political Reform Conference. And it became obvious that the future of elections all over the world was gravitating towards electronic voting, in spite of the fact that we have also seen, even in developed democracies, it has been a subject of contention. Even of recent, if you remember I think it was Bush and Al Gore election, that became a form of, a subject of contention, the electoral processes. So even that one is not a perfect system, but I think it's a much, much better in terms of cost effectiveness, and we cannot avoid it. I was looking at my phone. On Monday, the 21st of this month, I got a new policy that has been issued by INEC. There is a new policy, electoral policy. They call it Policy on Conducting Elections in the Context of the COVID-19 Pandemic. So even INEC on its own has started to look at this. Because right now, we are confronted with some few challenges. There are supposed to be 4 by-elections. I think 2 in Bayelsa, senatorial by-elections, 1 in Plateau as a result of the death of the senator in Plateau, and 1 other state. So there are supposed to be 4 by-elections. But because these by-elections are not time-frame, and because we are in the midst of this pandemic, they ought to have taken place. But because of issues relating to mass gathering, social distancing, personal hygiene, I think INEC has decided to step down. But they are confronted with 2 elections that it will become constitutionally impossible for them to shift: the Ondo and the Edo governorship elections. They have issued guidelines. They have even given out the time limit for this. But of interest, to answer your question, they have as Article 6 of these guidelines, ICT and voter registration. And the item 5 on that is what would give you a clear direction of where the management of INEC is going in terms of conduct of elections. And in item 5 of this Article 6, they mention the fact that INEC will pilot the use of electronic voting machines at the earliest possible time, not Edo and Ondo elections, but work towards the full introduction of electronic voting in major elections starting from 2021. So you can see, and that brings me to my concluding remarks. The world will never be the same again. And Nigeria is not an island. And it has become very, very obvious that we must begin to think in the direction in which the world has already gone ahead. In January, if you told me that we will have Federal Executive Council not congregating in the council chambers, I will tell you it's not possible. But we have had two now. We are going to the third one. If you said our president will not have to physically travel to any of the West African countries to hold ECOWAS meeting, I will tell you no. But they have had one virtual meeting. They have had even that of the non-aligned nations. And we continue to have conferences of the National Economic Council virtually. We've had video conferencing with the Governors Forum. We've had with the co-COVID. We've had with even leadership of the religious organizations. So the world has moved as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we must begin to place strategically our national infrastructure to respond to that. As to whether we would vote in 2023 electronically or not, out of compulsion, we must begin to think in that direction. Because that's the only way. I can see America even struggling with the issue of the November 20th election already. The chances are that most of the votes would have to be postal votes. Though there are some disputations with regards to that. But the fact of the matter is that their legislation provides for that. It provides for delayed votes, it provides for early voting, it provides for postal votes. Nigeria will not continue in the same way. Our normal has ceased. A new normal has issued or has been foisted on us as a nation. And I believe that that is the only way we can be players in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the national briefing for Wednesday, 27th May 2020. A number of messages have come out of today's briefing. The first is to our children. As our children share in the impact of COVID-19, our concern for a safe and secured future must remain very critical. States, local government, proprietors, administrators must play their roles to facilitate an early and safe reopening of our education sector. 2, this is to all Nigerians. The government feels the economic pains you are passing through. Government, on account of this, ensures that the gradual reopening of the economy also serves as a strategy for a post-COVID-19 economy. The third one is to our farmers. Food security is critical to national security. We encourage our farmers, extension workers, and other players in the agricultural production chain to go back to work to ensure that availability of food for Nigerians is underscored. Finally, wear a mask to reduce the spread of droplets and minimize exposure. Studies have shown that it can curb up to 75% of spread. I thank you very much. God bless Nigeria. We'll see you tomorrow, by the grace of God.